Hey everybody, Vermont Prepper here. Today I want to go over how you can probably turn the tides on people in an SHTF scenario by the use of drones. I'm a true believer in the ability of drones as sort of increasing your X factor, as they called it on Doomsday Preppers, dare I say, for prepping in general. So before I continue, I want to go over a couple things. First, I'm going to go over through the history of drones, how they came about, some examples, and then I'm going to go over something that I actually designed, and it will end with a 40-second YouTube video of me implementing a payload drop from a DJI Mavic Pro. And I want to get two things out of the way. First, I have no connection at all at DJI and receive zero in return for them for talking about this. And secondly, you might be asking yourself, why do I keep referring to these machines as UAVs? The simple answer is that I believe that the use of the word drone does not really do UAV justice. And UAV means unmanned air vehicle. To me, a drone could be a form of AI, sort of like a robot or some other ground-based machine or gadget. But it doesn't really tell you that a specific drone, UAV being a subset of a drone. Okay, so let's go through some of the history. Back in the mid to 1980s, prior to the adoption of the UAV or unmanned air vehicle, the pioneers of these projects use the term remotely piloted vehicles, or they're called RPVs. So I'm going to use both RPV and UAV interchangeably, as I believe that these terms better define the Mavic, which I actually own. And that said, I realize that most people refer them to as drones, as do I in other content that I produce. But I want to be kind of technical in this video. So much like most advanced technology, the consumer use of UAVs was born from the pioneers in the U.S. government that began using them for surveillance and actually lethal applications back in the late 80s and early 90s. The technology was cutting edge at the time, but rudimentary really by today's standards. And if you think about it, you think of the difference as far as how far drones have come. Think of a difference between the first cell phones, those huge things that you see back in the 80s on the movies, versus the smartphones today. So most smartphones today actually have much more computing power than any supercomputer back in the day when computers first came out. The concept of using UAVs to many in the government was pretty scary. In the beginning, they were really like inherently unstable, and a lost signal would result in a crash. And they could only be tested on military ranges or large swaths of private land, primarily with the sanction of generous landowners in the Southwest. And as an added obstacle, some of those in the government lacked the foresight into the program capabilities, and they actually wanted to cut off funding, as they believed these vehicles could never be stable enough or reliable enough to use in tactical situations. And thankfully, a group of ragtag team of pioneers, as I call them, persevered, and they were able to eventually produce one of the first stable UAVs of its kind, and it was known as the X-Drone. And here you see a picture of it, and it's gas powered. And I never liked the name X-Drone, actually. Again, using the word drone in there. And the drone, the X-Drone was launched from a rocket, or as I refer to it, sort of like a big bottle rocket. It had a rudimentary autopilot with a fraction of accuracy built that you see built into the Mavic Pro. And the Mavic Pro has a built-in GPS. This had nothing of the sort, the X-Drone. What it did have, though, is a real-time video feed, which was mostly unheard of at the time. And basically, it was pretty rudimentary, only that, a heading could be programmed into the system, but it required some old-school flight planning to, which included wind calculations as well. And then you had some bright communication experts on hand to fine-tune the antennas. And the range was extended from maybe 20 to 50 miles, which was actually pretty good. And you'd have teams along the route that could be deployed along sort of high points. You got to have line of sight for real-time, to keep their real-time video feed and to take control as necessary, usually utilizing a what they call, I'm sure you guys who fly these things know of futabas, a futaba controller. And that was pretty prevalent with RC aircraft at the time, and still now to a certain extent, actually. Each team, you say you have maybe 3 or 4 teams along that 50-mile range scattered out. They'd have their own portable base unit, and they use like a 4x4 Sony video screen to navigate along the flight path. And prior to the autopilot, the teams would actually need to fly it manually from start and practice handing it off by giving a notification to the forward team that they were turning off their futaba. So they'd count it down like 3, 2, 1, and then one team would turn it off and the other one would turn it on. And there was always that kind of scare that, when the second team turned it on, you wouldn't see you might see the X-Drone dive because it lost contact. It was pretty crazy. So, the handoff was really the time when the RPV was mostly at risk. And again, lost communication, that pretty much would result into a crash. And again, this technology was pretty rudimentary, but it was shown that you can utilize this UAV for forward surveillance, being that it had its real-time video, and it was small signature and radar signature, etc. And people really didn't know of drones back then, so they really had no idea what the heck it was. And it would fly high enough so that you really couldn't even see it unless you were looking for it. So these pioneers really had no idea that what they were doing would eventually provide a huge impact in keeping the world safe from terrorism. And given the limited technology, support, and budget, it was actually hard for them to see the eventual development of RPVs such as the Predator and its use of Hellfire missiles to take out terrorist targets. And in my view, we're still in the infancy of the UAV revolution. And technology is advancing faster than ever, and there's going to be tons of untapped uses for these vehicles. I know some preppers still might be hesitant on the utility of RPVs, such as the Mavic Pro. And the cost of the Mavic is not that inexpensive. It's $1,000, but given the possible uses in an SHTF scenario, it might be the best money you ever spent. So let's first take a brief look at some of the specific features of the Mavic and why I think it gives you the best bang for the buck. And then I'm going to follow with some tactical uses with a specific design that I actually tested and deployed, which you'll see in a 40-second video at the end. And I'm sure some of the smarter preppers out there can think of other uses that I would be happy to see in some of the comments. So let's go over the Mavic. All right, so base cost $1,000, right? That will give you a 27-minute flight time and a 4.3 mile range. You got to have line of sight. So it comes with one battery, and you have to recharge it after 27 minutes. This time is a little better than the average UAV. The 4.3 mile range is probably one of the furthest ranges out there in the consumer market. And a reasonably priced special antenna booster apparatus can be used to actually boost the range of the transmitter, although I never really tested it that far. I have had it out to a couple miles at least. And you know, you don't want to drain out the battery if you fly too far, and you know, you want to have enough battery to return, so you can't really utilize it until the battery technology gets better. And in contrast, you have, you know, DJI Matrice 100, which has a 40-minute flight time, but it's over triple the price of the Mavic. So it's really not, it's cost prohibitive for, you know, the average person out there. The range of the Matrice actually is less than the Mavic. It's only 3 miles. So if budget permits, it would be optimum to obtain a few extra batteries for the Mavic, and they cost probably about $90 each. And one of the benefits of using a software by Lychee, which is an app just like the lychee nut fruit, it's that it'll give it an estimated flight plan time to prevent the battery from fully draining, so you don't have to worry about it you know, going out too far. It'll tell you, hey, if you do this flight plan, it's going to take this long. So it's pretty cool. And I actually use Lychee over the DJI app. It's much better. Second thing, lightweight and foldable arms and props. The Mavic arms and props fold up nicely, and it's easily fit into a small backpack for deployment. It's very light. Alternatively, there's a lot of hard shell cases available on Amazon if better protection for the RPV and its accessories are required. And then I mentioned a little bit about software. It could be controlled by using the free DJI Go software or via Lychee. And with DJI Go, there's currently no autopilot capability except takeoff and land. And I enjoy the use of this software, the DJI, when I'm just flying around the vicinity to have fun. But it's not really, in my view, recommended for mission style, what you call sorties. For missions, I really believe that the Lychee software is the best software out there for the use of the Mavic. And as I mentioned before, you know, a flight plan could be programmed into the aircraft so that you can concentrate on really controlling the camera and the real-time video feed if you had to sort of gather intelligence. Say, you know, you come up upon a roadblock far away where they don't really see you yet. You could sort of get an idea with your drone if you fly out far enough that you know, how many cars there are, how many people, etc. So it's a good way to gather intelligence. And with Lychee, you know, altitude changes, point of interest, camera focus, loitering, and speed changes, they'll give you notifications of it right on your controller. So it's a much superior application to the DJI, with the exception of not having the ability yet to go live, namely on Facebook or YouTube if you want to show off to your friends. DJI actually allows live broadcasts, and maybe I think maybe Lychee does. I haven't used the drone in a while because it's cold here, but I heard they were trying to get there. Maybe they are, and some of you readers or YouTubers out there can tell me otherwise. But the software, the Lychee software, provides sort of real-time verbal telemetry feedback. So, you know, your altitude, your distance, battery power, etc. And that comes in pretty handy if you might be focusing your attention on your point of interest. You don't have to worry too much about navigation, although it is advisable to keep an idea of where you are on the map in case the thing goes down. But there's tons of YouTube instructional videos on how to use Lychee, and it's a very small learning curve, so I highly recommend it. I believe it cost me about $20 to get. The next thing for the Mavic is collision avoidance. And unlike many of the similarly priced competitors, the Mavic has collision avoidance system built in. So even if you tried to manually fly it into an obstacle, the Mavic avoidance system would first beep as a warning, and then it'll actually stop. It won't let you. And then lastly, but probably not least, insurance. So it's highly recommended if you're going to be using this thing in any sort of longer range missions or practice, or just having fun. There's an insurance that DJI offers. It's $99, and it even covers the damage of crashing into the waters. So you can use it twice, and I think you got to renew it every year. So now let's go through some of the limitations. You can't go through the pros without the cons, right? So in my view, one of the limitations is there's no thermal camera capability. And at this time, I don't know of any plans by DJI to offer their version of what's known as the Zen Muse thermal camera on the Mavic. So in my opinion, a thermal camera offering would put this RPV at the top of the heap for first responders in the military and give them ability to conduct night search and rescue operations. While the thermal cameras aren't inexpensive, they're around $6,000 to $12,000. It would be a lot cheaper than using helicopters with forward-looking infrared or FLIRs. And by the way, the Mavic noise signature would be virtually undetectable versus a helicopter from above, especially if you're trying to go stealth mode, right? Now, even like the newer Mavics have special propellers, which make them even quieter. All right, so it has a limited payload as well, and it's not really built for payload deployment. The Mavic DJI actually has other UAVs for this purpose, but they're about triple or quadruple the cost. And battery life, 27 minutes is good, okay, but it would be nice if you can increase that battery time to more like 40, 50 minutes. I know the newest Mavic, I think it has 30 minutes, which is only 3 minutes over the one that I have. So, it's not really worth the difference as far as battery goes. All right, so let's go through some of the tactical applications. So I want to lay out some caveats first, right? So I'm going to assume that we're in a SHTF environment, and I'm going to assume that you have the DJI Mavic Pro, not some toy that hovers 100 feet in the air. And I want to keep in mind that the FAA has an altitude limit of 400 feet above ground level, which is a no-fly zone, and it's also illegal to fly at night. So you have to keep that in mind when you're playing around with these things. So first thing, you could do a threat assessment for a specific location. So Mavic could provide pretty valuable intel if you might be concerned of a specific location in your vicinity, and you could do your Leachy pre-programmed flight plan, and the Mavic could circle the area from a safe distance and orient itself as it's circling toward the point of interest. And it could be programmed to remain there as long as the battery permits. You could just keep programming waypoints to circle. And again, 27-minute total flight time. Also, I could see application in avoiding or monitoring civil unrest. So in an SHTF scenario, especially for you urban preppers, it's quite possible there would be a civil disturbance out there as people run out of food, water, and medical supplies. So prior to making supply runs, the Mavic can scout ahead to determine if there's pockets of unrest blocking your route. The next thing is avoiding capture by hostiles. So much like the civil unrest scenario, the Mavic might provide some help in trying to avoid potential captors. And in this scenario, you might have a further standoff or climb to a higher altitude to minimize detection. And the Mavic, again, is pretty quiet, and it can't be heard and it's hard to see at an altitude of 400 foot above ground. So in an SHTF environment, if the altitude limits go out the window, it would allow even for a further standoff distance or height. And if we want to have a little fun, let's say we have a full blown out zombie apocalypse, right? So everyone loves the zombie apocalypse. And I actually have to give this idea to my 17-year-old son. I have to give him credit for it. So given the zombies' affinity for sound, if the Mavic is flown low enough, the UAV could redirect a zombie horde away from you. So in all seriousness, I am sure that there's some people out there that can think of real-life diversionary tactics that might be applied utilizing the Mavic. And I really don't mean any offense to zombies. I can see some kind of small battery-operated sound generator, maybe on a timer, being attached and used as a diversion prior to an offensive or defensive operation. So a lot of things can be done with this thing. Next, scout for water, food supplies, vehicles. So food, water, and other supplies are going to become harder to find in a disaster scenario. And larger bodies of water might be easier to identify. The Mavic might be able to assist in finding some lesser known streams or tributaries. And, even additionally, while they can't be used for hunting, all bets are off in a survival situation. The Mavic can help to possibly locate wildlife and even herd them towards your location if you had to hunt to survive in this kind of scenario. Okay, disaster surveillance. Here's another one. So an inaccessible area. So survival situation can occur not only from bad people and governments, bad governments, but also from natural disasters such as earthquakes, tornadoes, and hurricanes. And in August of 1992, I was at Miami, Florida, in my house with my mother and brother when Category 5 Hurricane Andrew hit. And for anyone that was there, they would remember that it hit landfall at 4:30 a.m. and the worst of it lasted for about 2 hours. It was a relatively small hurricane, but it left $23 billion in damage and its aftermath. So what you see right here is a memento that I have. I framed the front page of the day after, August 25th, Miami Herald publication titled Destruction at Dawn. And this picture actually was taken about a half mile from my house. And you can see just total destruction. It looks like a nuclear bomb hit. And this sort of was the event that spurred me into prepping, into a prepper mindset. I was pretty young then. Still relatively young, by the way. Communities really were reduced to rubble, and there were many dishonest people, both from within and out of the state, who swooped in and took advantage of the people who were less fortunate. And it was sickening to see blocks of ice being sold for $50 and $300 generators being sold for thousands. The roads were not navigable due to flood and debris. And I think back quite often as to how a Mavic Pro could have helped us avoid a lot of dead ends, obstacles, and gridlock in trying to get out of the city, which really wouldn't restore full power for about 6 months. And you think about this, Miami, Florida, without full power restoration for 6 months. And I know it was bad in Puerto Rico, but this is here in the mainland U.S., easy to get to from a disaster standpoint, and still didn't have power for 6 months. All right, so here's my contraption. So small payload drop. So here's what I developed. It's a small payload, and I'll have better pictures of it. So small amounts of food, medical supplies, or communications can be dropped from a Mavic. And by my best estimates in testing, the Mavic has between a 1 to 2 pound payload capability. And I am currently flight testing it for payload stability and experimenting with the payload drop mechanism that actually doesn't require the addition of any electronics. So I haven't seen too many YouTube videos with Mavic payload experiments, so I'm going to share my idea as I really believe it could benefit everyone if they had success. So I have a video where it's going to drop, which I'll show you in a few minutes, a 1.5 pound ham radio. And it's recommended that you have a detailed plan and be sure to consult some flight testing reference material. So if you decide to experiment on your own, perform the tests in small increments at low altitudes to avoid, crashing your drone. Because mine, I did it really low and it was shaking around the first time I did it, and I had to make some adjustments. So also keep good notes, develop a flight test checklist, and be aware of your area. Most of all, expect that things aren't going to go as planned, and you're probably going to have both major and minor adjustments. So I had 8 design criteria for payload. I wanted it to be low cost. I wanted a max 2 pound payload, and the actual payload weight was determined during flight testing. I wanted the use of a parachute to drop from altitude so that it protected the payload. I didn't want to add any servos or other kind of remote capability to activate the payload. I wanted aircraft stability so that it could fly over distance with this payload. And I wanted to avoid so-called prop wash. And I wanted it to be simple to fabricate, and I wanted it to be reusable. So those are the 8 design payload deployment criteria. So before you start cracking up at this picture and some of my materials, keep in mind that I really did have a method to the madness, and a background in aerospace engineering with some UAV flight testing experience. Before the current technological revolution in the 80s or 90s, pioneers activated certain features during flight by sort of an extreme altitude drop, kind of like a free fall. So the solution that I offer kind of utilizes this same premise. So I mixed the old theory with the new technology and demonstrated it with the Mavic Pro. And all of the items I purchased on eBay were basically $20. And keep in mind that I've seen payload release systems that range from $100 to $1,000, all of which are servo activated. And these are great, but I don't know really of any application that uses a payload system without having to add some kind of electronic actuation. All right, so here's the design. It's a Tupperware container, as you see, and it's attached to 4 UAV arms. If you see right here, the 4 arms, I have it connected with some hooks, so they're eye hooks that's fastened to the 4 corners of the container down here, and it's hung from the arms of the Mavic via 4 pieces of fishing line, each cut to 2 feet. And the end result would be that the container with payload will fly approximately 2 foot below the UAV to avoid the prop wash. And 4 lines were used because I wanted it to be stable, and it actually is pretty stable. And the payload was attached to a parachute via zip ties, and it was a parachute for a flare actually that I got off of eBay. So you put the zip ties connected to the parachute or connected to the payload, wrap it around the parachute, and it's neatly placed into the container. So I have like a trap door that you see right here. You see like 3 sides cut out right here. And I have a release mechanism, and don't laugh at this, but here's my high-tech, ultra high-tech, as I say right here, payload release hinge, all right? This is something right here, which I used a basic wire connector right there with the zip tie to the bottom. And this is the opening for the payload. And I have a clip for paper that keeps this thing secured until I actually shake back and forth in a flight path, shake, go forward and backward really fast to kind of shake it, and this thing actually releases and it drops out. All right. So you can buy, a 36-inch flare parachute on eBay, or you can actually fabricate a parachute from bed sheets. And 36 inches is the size needed to safely drop up to a 2-pound payload. And there's templates online on how to do that. And again, the payload is dropped by using its own weight, first by vertically rising at the fastest rate possible, then descending quickly to break the bond of this release right here. And the trapdoor is actually released by this black office clip right here. And again, the bottom of it is cut out right here. All right, so you see the 3 sides are cut out, and there's your zip tie to keep it fastened to the black clip. All right, and it kind of acts as like a hinge, right? So it just drops out of here, acts as like a hinge. All right, so next I'm going to show you the payload. So here's a ham radio right here, and it's zip tied with the antenna right there, and it's connected with a hook to your parachute. And this again is the flare parachute. And right here you see the Mavic actually in flight with the payload inside right there. And it's pretty cool the way it flies. It flies really, really stable. You really have to shake it to make it drop. But there's some challenges, right? When you're designing these things, you might have a payload being too heavy for the container and it might deploy before it's desired. Wind might cause the payload to prematurely deploy. Fishing line could break and get tangled into the props, and that would cause a catastrophic failure. Sudden turns or altitude changes can also prematurely deploy the parachute. And if you don't set it up right, it could cause unstable flight. And you're probably going to have a shorter flight time. And I didn't really test this over a long period. I just basically tested it for proof of concept. So, and it might have a little bit of an undue strain on the Mavic electrical system. So you have to keep this in mind. So you got to find the optimum payload weight so it can fly stable without premature deployment. The last picture I have here before I show you the video is the parachute deployment. And please don't give me a hard time about my video, because of the first video I actually put up on YouTube. And it's really grainy. It's taken with a really horrible camera. But you do get to see it drop in real time. So here's the video right here. And we're going to see it. And I'll put the sound on.
All right, we're doing the first.
So there it goes.
Off of a radio.
There it goes, and I'll try and keep it nicely on there. It's flying. And then you'll see it shake back and forth. There we go, up, right? And then I kind of dropped down. Didn't drop yet. Okay, you'll see it again. There it goes right there. And there's your parachute. And there it is. It safely drops, and you can view that on YouTube. And you know, it's pretty cool the way it worked. I was really happy with how it came about, and you know, get to go through flight testing again, and really see success. So it could be used in a first responder. My thought was first responders having to drop, you know, radio for communication in inaccessible areas. So that was my thought. I might refine it to make it a little bit prettier, the payload container. But for right now, that's what I'm going to do. I'll probably start testing it over longer distances and go from there. All right, guys, hope you liked the video, and I know it was long, but hopefully it was worth it and you gained a little bit of knowledge. Please like, subscribe, or comment. Vermont Prepper out. Take care, and as always, keep prepping.